That morning, Chad, my son-in-law, had laid a hand on me, and I had stayed quiet. The sting lingered, a physical ache that burrowed deeper than skin, into the very marrow of my pride. By dinner time, I had cooked a feast, the kind of spread you'd see in a glossy magazine, fit for a king. My daughter, Jessica, surveyed the table, a pleased, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You finally understand your place, Dad," she'd said, a touch of triumph in her voice. She was right. I did understand. But that smile, so fleeting and self-satisfied, would curdle on her face the moment she saw who was sitting at the head of the table. If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching, soul-deep sting of betrayal from the very people you built a world for, the ones you sacrificed everything for, please, take a moment and hit that like button. It truly helps this old man feel a little less alone in this big, noisy world. And if you want to know how this whole messy, heartbreaking dinner party plays out, subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you are going to want to see how this particular evening, this grand illusion of a family meal, comes to its unavoidable end. And hey, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. It's good to know people are out there, listening. The heavy folder of loan documents slammed into my chest before I even had a chance to pour my first cup of coffee that morning. It slid down my worn flannel shirt, a cascade of financial ruin, landing with a dull thud on the cold, polished marble floor of the kitchen. I didn't need to pick it up to know exactly what it was. The sight of that thick, manila folder, bulging with its promise of ruin, had become a familiar, unwelcome fixture in my week. This was the third time this month Chad had tried to force this on me, this relentless, almost desperate insistence. "Sign the papers, Frank!" Chad had shrieked, his voice cracking with that high-pitched desperation only a man truly addicted to the gamble, living on the razor's edge of financial collapse, truly knows, the kind of desperation that turns a man into a predator, even within his own family. "We need the equity from the Lake Tahoe house by noon, old man, or the whole damn deal falls through. Don't be such a stubborn old fossil. Just sign the damn line." His words, laced with disdain, hit me harder than the folder. I bent down slowly, the joints in my knees protesting with a series of pops and clicks, sounds that seemed to echo through the cavernous kitchen of this suburban San Francisco mansion. The same mansion I had bought with my life's work. Every brick, every beam, a testament to decades of sweat and sacrifice. I picked up the documents. My hands, rough and calloused from 40 years of shaping reinforced steel and pouring concrete on countless projects, from soaring skyscrapers in the city to sprawling bridge foundations, were steady. They did not shake. Chad's hands, however, were trembling, a faint tremor that spoke volumes about his internal turmoil, his fragile composure. He was 35 years old, a so-called venture capitalist, a title he wore like a bespoke suit, spending his days in front of 3 glowing computer screens, managing to lose money faster than I could earn it. He peddled in abstract concepts, in the ephemeral promise of future wealth, while I built tangible realities, structures that withstood time and gravity. I looked at the papers. It was a second mortgage application for our vacation home up in Lake Tahoe, the place Beatrice and I had dreamed of retiring to, a peaceful haven away from the city's hustle. The interest rate was predatory, a staggering 7.5%, the kind of rate that only desperate people accept, or those who truly believe they'll never have to pay. It was financial suicide, plain and simple, a ticking time bomb disguised as an opportunity. I looked up at him. Chad was sweating, a fine sheen of perspiration beading on his forehead, even though the central air conditioning in this oversized house was set to a brisk 68 degrees. The chill of the room was a stark contrast to the burning desperation in his eyes, the heat of his impending financial ruin. "No, Chad," I said, my voice low, steady, a foundation poured in solid concrete. "I told you last week, and I'm telling you again now. The answer is no. This structure," I gestured vaguely around the opulent, yet hollow, kitchen, "cannot support any more weight. You are already dangerously over-leveraged." I spoke not just as a father, but as the structural engineer I used to be, a language I had lived and breathed for half a century. My entire professional life had been spent calculating loads and stresses, ensuring that the colossal skyscrapers that pierced the San Francisco skyline, like the iconic Bayview Tower, did not collapse under their own immense weight, or the violent tremors of a California earthquake. I knew a failing structure when I saw one, and Chad Hayes, with his house of cards built on borrowed dreams and credit, was a building on the verge of implosion, a demolition waiting to happen. You don't get to tell me about leverage, you old parasite. Chad spat back, taking a menacing step into my personal space, his face contorted in a mask of contempt. You live under my roof. You eat my food. You exist because I allow it. I almost laughed then, a bitter, mirthless sound that caught in my throat. His roof? The audacity was breathtaking. I had bought this house 5 years ago, paid for it in cash, when Jessica, my sweet, naive daughter, had tearfully explained that they needed more space for the family they endlessly talked about starting, but never quite did. A bigger house for imaginary children. I paid the full amount, up front, every penny earned from years of freezing winters and scorching summers on construction sites, the very ground shaking beneath my feet as I worked to build safer, stronger cities. But I let them put their names on the mailbox. Mr. and Mrs. Chad Hayes. A gesture of love, a simple act of wanting my daughter to feel proud, to feel secure in her new life, in her beautiful new home. Now, that security, the very foundation I had laid for her, was being twisted and used as a weapon against me, a cruel perversion of my good intentions. I am not signing, Chad, I reiterated, my voice holding firm, placing the folder, the instrument of my potential downfall, back onto the cold, unforgiving granite island. And I am certainly not a parasite. I pay for the groceries, the utilities, the property taxes on his house, and I mow the lawn that you're too important to touch, the one that perfectly manicured patch of green outside that you seem to think magically maintains itself. I pay for the pool maintenance, the gardening services, the endless small repairs that seem to crop up in a house this size. This isn't charity, Chad. It's a cohabitation agreement, one that's grown increasingly one-sided. That was the precise moment the dam broke. I saw it in his eyes first, a flicker, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage, an animalistic fury that shocked me. He wasn't used to being told no, not truly. He was a man who had glided through life on the back of easy credit, hollow promises, and my generosity. I was, perhaps, the last true reality check he had left, the only remaining barrier to his self-destructive impulses. His hand moved faster than I would have expected from a man who had never done a single day of honest physical labor in his life, a man whose hands were soft and unblemished, unlike my own. The back of his hand connected hard, sickeningly hard, with my right cheek. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet, sterile kitchen, a sharp, violent crack that echoed like a dry branch snapping underfoot in the harsh silence of winter. The force of the blow knocked my head violently to the side. My glasses, the wire-rimmed aviators I had worn for decades, ever since I was supervising the concrete pours at the base of the Bayview Tower, flew off my face. They skittered across the polished marble floor, their trajectory ending with a sickening crunch against the base of the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator. I stood there, frozen in time, the metallic tang of blood filling my mouth. My cheek burned, a searing, white-hot pain, as if I had been touched by the intense flame of a welding torch. But I did not fall. I did not cry out. I just stood there, tasting the coppery tang of my own blood from where my tooth had cut the inside of my lip, a grim communion with the violence. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head back to look at him. Chad was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his hand still slightly raised, suspended in the air, as if even he was momentarily surprised by the sheer force of his own sudden violence. But there was no regret in his eyes, no flicker of remorse, only a raw, defiant dare. He was waiting for me to crumble, to fall to my knees, to become the senile, broken old man he desperately wanted me to be. He was waiting for me to cry, to beg for his forgiveness, to finally submit. But I wasn't looking at Chad. My gaze, though blurred by the shock and the absence of my glasses, was fixed on her. Jessica, my daughter, my only child, my flesh and blood, was standing in the doorway leading to the dining room, a silent witness to the assault. She was dressed in her crisp power suit, perfectly tailored, ready for her high-pressure job as a human resources director at a major tech logistics firm in the city. She had seen everything, every calculated word, every desperate plea, and every brutal moment of her husband striking her 72-year-old father. I waited. I waited for her to scream, for that familiar childhood shriek of outrage and disbelief. I waited for her to run to me, to cradle my bruised face in her hands. I waited for her to turn on him, to unleash the fury of a daughter defending her patriarch, to kick him out of the house I had bought for her, out of our lives. I waited for the little girl I had once carried on my shoulders, the one whose scraped knees I'd kissed better, the one I'd worked double shifts for 2 decades to pay for her college tuition, to defend the man who had given her everything. Jessica took a slow, deliberate sip from her travel mug, the casualness of the gesture a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding before her. She did not look at me. Her eyes, cool and distant, darted to her watch, a glance that spoke volumes of inconvenience and annoyance. "Dad," she sighed, and the sound of her exasperation, her sheer annoyance, hurt more, far more, than the physical slap ever could. It was a cold, cutting wound to the soul. "You really provoked him this time. You know how much stress Chad is under with the market shifting, with all these complex deals he's juggling. Why do you have to be so difficult? Just sign the papers so we can finally have some peace." My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs moments before, a frantic drumbeat of pain and betrayal, suddenly went still. It was a cold stillness, a chilling silence, like the profound quiet that descends after a building demolition is complete, and the dust, the debris of what once was, slowly begins to settle. I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, stripped bare of all the filters of memory and paternal love. I realized then that I did not know this woman. This was not the girl who used to cry when she found a wounded bird in our backyard, the one who would spend hours trying to nurse it back to health. This was a stranger, an alien presence in my own home, a stranger who had irrevocably chosen her side, who valued the lavish lifestyle Chad promised her, the fleeting illusion of status and wealth, more than the dignity, the well-being, or even the basic safety of her own father. She was not a victim, not in this moment. She was an accomplice, a willing participant in my humiliation. I walked slowly over to where my glasses lay, shattered on the marble floor. I bent down, ignoring the throbbing pain in my cheek, and picked them up. One of the lenses was cracked right down the middle, a jagged spiderweb marring the view. The wire frame was bent and twisted, an irreparable break. These glasses, old and familiar, had survived decades of Chicago winters, the perilous construction site accidents, the endless grime, and 40 years of constant wear. They were tough, a testament to resilience, but they had finally broken under the crushing weight of my own family's insatiable greed. I carefully placed the shattered remains in my shirt pocket, a grim souvenir. I wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand, smearing it across the rough fabric of my sleeve. I looked at Chad. He was puffing out his chest, empowered, emboldened by his wife's casual support, her chilling complicity. He mistook her lack of intervention for an affirmation, a license for his continued cruelty. "Well?" he barked, his voice regaining its bluster, now tinged with a fresh layer of malice. "Are you going to sign, or do I have to teach you another lesson, old man?" I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze steady, unflinching. I summoned the same quiet, authoritative command I used to employ when I had to fire a negligent contractor on a job site, the kind of authority that didn't need to shout to be heard. But I kept my voice low, calm, terrifyingly calm, a still pond before a hurricane. "You made your point, Chad," I said, the words cutting through the tension like a sharpened blade. Chad sneered, a triumphant, self-satisfied twist of his lips. "Good. So, sign it." "I cannot sign it now," I said, my voice still unnervingly level, gesturing subtly to my hands, which indeed had begun to tremble, not from fear, but from a suppressed fury that threatened to erupt. "You rattled me. I need to calm down. I need to think." "You don't have time to think," Chad shouted, his fragile patience snapping. The deal collapses at noon. Tonight, I interrupted him, my gaze unwavering, holding his. Tonight, we will settle this. At dinner. Chad narrowed his eyes, suspicious of my sudden, uncharacteristic capitulation. Dinner? He asked, his voice laced with distrust. Yes, I said. I will cook. I will make a special meal, a celebration. If I'm going to sign away the Lake Tahoe house, I want to do it properly. You bring the papers. And bring your lawyer, that man. Leonard Stone. I want everything to be legal. Above board? Chad laughed then, a cruel, barking sound that grated on my ears. Look at that, Jessica, he crowed, turning to my daughter, who was still hovering in the doorway. The old dog finally learned a new trick. Obedience. Jessica walked over to Chad, draped an arm around his waist, and kissed him lightly on the cheek, ignoring me completely, as if I were a ghost already. See, babe? She cooed, her voice saccharine sweet. I told you he would come around. He just needs a firm hand. A firm hand. That's what she called assault. That's what she called the casual violence of a man who felt entitled to everything. Fine, Chad said, checking his perfectly coiffed reflection in the polished surface of the microwave door, adjusting his tie. Have dinner ready by 7, old man, and try not to burn it this time. Make something expensive. I feel like celebrating. They grabbed their expensive briefcases, their symbols of perceived power and status, and walked out the door without a backward glance, without a single word of concern for my bruised face. I heard the garage door open, the roar of Chad's latest Porsche, a sleek, expensive machine, as they sped away to their important lives, their world of high-stakes deals and luxury, leaving the old man behind to lick his wounds in the quiet wreckage of the kitchen. I stood in the profound silence of the kitchen for a long, heavy moment. I touched my cheek. It was throbbing now, a steady, relentless pulse of pain. I knew it would bruise, a deep, angry purple by evening. Good. I wanted the bruise. I wanted them to see it, a visible mark of their transgression, a testament to what had transpired. They thought I was defeated, broken, a senile old man who had finally been broken by fear, by the threat of homelessness. They saw a cracked lens and a bleeding lip. They did not know that they had just cracked the very foundation of their entire carefully constructed world, a world built entirely on my silent strength. I am a structural engineer, a builder of foundations, a calculator of stress and strain. I know that when a load-bearing wall is compromised, when the core integrity of a structure is threatened, you do not simply patch it with tape or spackle. You condemn the building, and then, deliberately, systematically, you bring it down. I walked to the basement door. My legs, which had felt heavy in old moments before, felt stronger with every deliberate step, infused with a new purpose. I wasn't going to the basement to hide. I was going to my old office, my sanctuary, the one place in this sprawling, impersonal house that they never dared to enter, because it smelled of old paper, of faded blueprints, of honest work, things they considered archaic and irrelevant. Inside that office, hidden beneath a worn Persian rug, was a floor safe. Jessica thought it only contained my life insurance policy and her mother's old jewelry, sentimental trinkets from a life she barely remembered. She was wrong. I knelt down, my knees, though still protesting, moved with a newfound fluidity, and I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open with a satisfying thud. A mechanical welcome to my real world. Inside was a stack of files, documents I had been compiling meticulously for the past 6 months, each piece a carefully selected component of my impending demolition. Bank statements, emails I had recovered from the trash, and a burner phone I had bought with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over, far from any prying eyes or digital trails. I picked up the phone. It felt small and unassuming in my calloused hand, but it was a conduit to a power they couldn't comprehend. I dialed a number I had memorized a lifetime ago, a number etched into my memory, not just as digits, but as a lifeline. It rang twice. "Miller," I said, when the deep, gravelly voice on the other end answered. "It's Frank. It's time." There was a pause on the other end, a beat of profound silence that stretched across the phone lines, from my quiet basement to his bustling office. "Are you sure, Frank?" David Miller's voice, though calm, held an underlying current of steel. "Once we start this, there's no going back. The machinery of justice, once set in motion, is relentless." I touched my bruised cheek again, the pain a grim confirmation, a fresh spark to my resolve. "I'm sure," I said, my voice unwavering, steady as the concrete foundations I had built. "Bring Stone. Bring the whole team. Come at 7. The table is set." I hung up the phone and sat back in my old leather chair, the familiar creak, a comforting sound in the quiet. I looked at the cracked lens of my glasses in my hand, a symbol of broken trust. Chad wanted a celebration. He wanted something expensive. I would give him exactly what he asked for. I was going to serve him the most expensive meal of his life. I stood up and grabbed my old Chevy truck keys. I had to go to the Epicurean market. I needed Wagyu beef. I needed vintage wine. And I needed to make sure my knife was sharp. Very sharp. Because tonight, I wasn't just cooking dinner. I was carving out justice. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, the reverberation rattling the framed photographs in the hallway. Pictures of Jessica growing up, of family vacations, of a life that felt increasingly like a distant memory. I stood there, alone in the echoing foyer, listening to the silence that rushed in to fill the space they had left behind. The engine of Chad's Porsche roared to life outside, aggressive and loud, a testament to his flashy, superficial existence, before fading into the suburban hum down the street. They were gone. They had left me bleeding in the kitchen of the house I bought, driving to jobs I had helped them secure, living a life built entirely on my shoulders, sustained by my unspoken sacrifices. I walked over to the tall bay window and watched the sleek, expensive car disappear around the gentle bend of the tree-lined street. My hand went up to my cheek again. The skin was hot to the touch, and I could already feel the subtle swelling beginning to rise. A silent testimony to Chad's aggression. A normal man, perhaps, would have gone to the freezer, would have grabbed a bag of frozen peas or a towel soaked in ice water to soothe the inflammation, to lessen the pain. But I wasn't feeling like a normal man today. I did not go to the freezer. I wanted the pain. I wanted the throbbing heat in my face to remind me, with every pulse, exactly what had happened, what had been taken from me. I wanted the bruise to turn a deep, ugly purple by this evening, a visible scar for all to see. I wanted it to be the first thing Chad saw when he walked back through that door, a silent accusation. It wasn't just an injury, it was evidence. It was the final, irreversible crack in the structural integrity of this family. The point of no return. Jessica, my little girl. The image of her standing there, impassively checking her watch while her husband assaulted me, burned in my mind, hotter, more searing than the slap itself. That was the true betrayal. A physical slap, a bruise, those things heal, they fade. But seeing your own flesh and blood choose convenience over morality, seeing her step over her own father to get to her luxury car, to maintain her superficial life, that is a fracture that cannot be repaired. That is a wound that goes bone deep, beyond the reach of any salve or time. She thought she was keeping the peace. She thought she was being a good wife, supporting her husband. But in that moment, she had just become an accessory to a crime, complicit in the dissolution of our family. Chad's parting words echoed in the empty kitchen, a mocking, dismissive challenge. "Don't play games, Frank. Stone is coming tonight. He'll have the notary seal. You just sign and shut up. Stone, Leonard Stone, that crooked lawyer, always smelling of stale cigars and cheap, cloying cologne, like a thin veneer over something rotten. He was the one who had helped Chad set up the labyrinthine shell companies, the ones designed to obscure his shady dealings. He was the one who had drafted the papers to drain my retirement fund, a legal architect of my financial ruin. Chad thought bringing Stone, a man he considered a shark, was a power move, a clear signal of his intent to dominate. He thought he was bringing a predator to devour a minnow. He did not know he was bringing the bait. I turned away from the window and headed toward the basement stairs. The upper floors of this house belonged to them. The polished marble, the custom skylights, the abstract modern art, that cost more than a year of college tuition. That was their world. A world of surfaces, of appearances, of carefully curated Instagram moments. My world was downstairs. I descended the wooden steps, each creak of the old staircase a familiar lament. The air down here was cooler, more settled, carrying the comforting scent of dry concrete and old paper, a stark contrast to the perfumed superficiality above. This was where I kept my life. Not the life they saw, the quiet old man watching TV in the corner, fading into the background, but my real life, my history, the foundation of who I was. I walked into my office. It was a small room, unfinished, with exposed beams and a rough concrete floor. They hated this room. They called it the dungeon, a place unworthy of their pristine aesthetic. They never came down here. That was their mistake. Arrogance, I've learned, always creates blind spots, always leads to unforeseen structural failures. I sat down at my heavy steel desk. It was an old drafting table, a relic I had saved from a demolition site back in the 90s, a testament to enduring quality. I ran my hand over its smooth, cool metal surface, feeling the weight of years of honest work. Underneath the desk, beneath a worn-out Persian rug that Beatrice had bought 40 years ago, a splash of vibrant color in this utilitarian space, was a floor safe. I pulled back the rug. The safe was old, solid steel, encased directly into the foundation of the house itself. I had poured the concrete around it myself, a secret chamber in the very bones of the structure. When I had mentioned it to Chad years ago, a casual, almost offhand comment, I told him it just held some old insurance policies and sentimental junk, the kind of things an old man keeps. He had laughed, a dismissive chuckle, and never asked about it again. He was too busy looking for quick digital transfers, for ephemeral wealth, to care about a mechanical lock, about something that required patience and persistence. I spun the dial, the tumblers clicking into place with a satisfying, mechanical precision that bespoke craftsmanship. The heavy door swung open, revealing the dark, cool interior. I reached inside. There were no insurance policies. Instead, I pulled out a thick stack of documents, carefully organized. These were the blueprints of Chad's destruction, the meticulous plans for his carefully orchestrated downfall. I laid them out on the desk, each sheet a piece of the puzzle. There was the forensic accounting report I had commissioned 3 months ago, a detailed, irrefutable tracing of every single dollar Chad had siphoned from the family accounts, every illicit transfer, every hidden expenditure. It painted a damning picture of a man systematically looting his own family. There was the copy of the forged withdrawal slip from my 401k, the retirement fund I had built over 45 years of freezing winters and scorching summers on construction sites. He had practiced my signature, painstakingly, it seemed. It was a good forgery, almost convincing, but not perfect. He missed the subtle loop on the letter P in Peterson. I always looped it twice, a habit I had picked up from signing countless blueprints. He only did it once, a small detail, but in engineering, the small details are everything. And there was the most damning piece of all, a printed email thread between Chad and a shadowy group of short sellers, people he worked with to manipulate markets. He was leaking false information, actively spreading rumors about supposed structural defects in the Vance Tower, a landmark building in San Francisco that I had consulted on, designed, and helped construct over 2 decades ago. My masterpiece. He was trying to drive the stock price of Vance Construction, Eleanor Vance's company, down into the ground, a calculated act of sabotage, so he could bet against it and make a fortune. He was willing to destroy my professional reputation, my legacy as an engineer, the very meaning of my life's work, just to cover his mounting gambling debts. I looked at the papers, each one a nail in his coffin. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was federal fraud. This was market manipulation on a grand scale. This was a felony, a severe criminal offense with serious consequences. I reached back into the safe and pulled out a rolled-up tube of paper, an old blueprint. I unrolled it on the desk, weighing down the corners with a stapler and a heavy hole punch. It was the original structural schematic of the very house we were standing in, this opulent mansion, my gift to Jessica. I looked at the load-bearing walls, the intricate web of support. I looked at the foundation points, the precise calculations that held it all together. Chad thought he was the master of this house, the one in control. But I knew exactly where the weak points were. I knew exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole thing down in a controlled demolition, precise and inevitable. Finally, I reached into the very back of the safe and pulled out a small, cheap flip phone, a burner phone, its plastic casing a stark contrast to the weighty documents. I had bought it with cash at a gas station 3 towns over, an anonymous transaction. Chad monitored the landline. He monitored the family cell plan, every text, every call. He thought he was smart. He thought he had cut off my lines of communication, isolated me. He thought he had rendered me helpless. I powered on the phone. The battery was full, a small green bar of defiance. I dialed a number I had memorized a lifetime ago, a number etched into my memory, not just as digits, but as a lifeline. It rang once, twice. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the third ring. "This line is for emergencies only." "Hello, David," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, as if we were just picking up a conversation from years ago. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of profound silence that stretched across the phone lines, from my quiet basement to his bustling office. "Frank, I've been waiting for this call. Is it done?" "It is done," I said. I looked at the bruise forming on my cheek, reflected in the dark basement window, a grim reminder. "He crossed the line today, David. He got physical. And Jessica," she stood by and watched. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. David Miller was the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California, a powerful figure in the federal justice system. But before that, he was just a kid from my old neighborhood in the Mission District, a bright, struggling kid I had taken under my wing, kept out of trouble, mentored. I had even paid for his first suit when he passed the bar exam, a proud moment. He still called me Uncle Frank when we were alone, a sign of enduring respect and affection. "Are you safe, Frank?" David asked, his voice now laced with genuine concern, the professional facade cracking slightly. "Do I need to send a squad car now? We can be there in 10 minutes. "No," I said, "not now. If you arrest him now, he'll claim it's a misunderstanding. He'll claim I'm a senile old man who got confused, suffering from memory lapses, and he was just trying to help me. We need him to commit to the lie. We need him to feel safe, complacent, triumphant." "What's the plan?" David asked, his voice shifting back to the sharp, analytical tone of a prosecutor. "He's coming back tonight at 7, I said. "He's bringing Leonard Stone, his lawyer. They're going to try to force me to sign a second mortgage on the Lake Tahoe property. They think I'm broken. They think I'm going to sign everything over, give them carte blanche to my remaining assets." "Stone is coming?" David asked, his interest clearly piqued, a new intensity in his voice. "That slippery eel? We've been trying to pin something on Stone for years, Frank. If he's there facilitating a fraudulent loan, acting as an accomplice to Chad's schemes, that's conspiracy. That's a major break." "Exactly," I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. "That's why we wait. I'm cooking dinner. I'm making it a celebration. I want them relaxed. I want them arrogant, full of themselves." "Okay," David said, the plan forming rapidly in his mind. "I'll have a team in place, discreetly, outside the property." "No team yet," I corrected him. "My plan precise, calculated. Just you. I want you to come to dinner." "To dinner?" David sounded genuinely confused, a rare lapse in his composure. "Yes," I told him. "I'm inviting a friend, an old chess partner. Chad thinks you're just some retiree, an old man who plays board games. Wear a dark suit. Look intimidating, but say nothing. I want him to wonder who you are, until it's too late. And Frank," I added, a new layer to the plan unfolding, "call Eleanor." "Eleanor Vance," David clarified, his voice laced with disbelief. "The CEO of Vance Construction? The woman Chad's been trying to sabotage?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Tell her to come too. Tell her the man who is trying to tank her company's stock, to destroy her life's work, is going to be serving roast beef at 7. Tell her I have the proof she needs to save her company and bury Chad Hayes." There was a long silence on the line, a profound quiet broken only by David's steady breathing. Then I heard a low chuckle, a dark, satisfied sound that rumbled from deep in his chest. "You're going to put Chad, Stone, the federal prosecutor, and the CEO of the company he's sabotaging all at the same dinner table, Frank?" David asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and grim amusement. "That's the plan?" I said. "Frank, that's not a dinner party," David said, the chuckle gone, replaced by a serious, almost reverent tone. "That's an execution." "It's a controlled demolition, David," I corrected him, my gaze fixed on the metaphorical building I was about to bring down. "And the fuse is lit." "I'll be there," David said. 7 sharp. I hung up the phone and powered it down, a final act of disconnecting from their world. I put it back in the safe, but left the door unlocked. I would need those documents soon. I sat there for a moment in the quiet of the basement. My cheek throbbed, pulsing in time with my heartbeat, a steady, relentless reminder. I touched the rough concrete wall of the foundation, feeling its strength, its unyielding nature. Chad thought I was weak because I was old. He thought I was stupid because I worked with my hands, because my labor was tangible, not abstract. He forgot that before you can build a skyscraper, before you can reach for the clouds, you first have to dig a hole. You have to get down in the dirt, get your hands dirty, and understand the pressure, the true weight of the world. You have to understand the ground beneath your feet. I stood up. I had work to do. I had to go to the market. I had to buy the wine. I had to select the meat, the finest cut. I walked up the stairs, leaving the darkness of my sanctuary behind, ascending into the light of the house I was about to dismantle. The game had changed. They were playing checkers, moving pieces around, trying to steal a little money here and there, a small-time grift. I was playing structural engineering, and I was about to pull the pin on the whole foundation, bringing down their entire world. I climbed the carpeted stairs to the 2nd floor, leaving the security, the quiet resolve of my concrete basement, behind. The air up here felt thinner, artificially chilled by the central air conditioning that ran 24 hours a day, a constant hum of manufactured comfort. This was Chad's territory. The hallway was lined with large, expensive black and white artistic photos of San Francisco cityscapes, images Chad had bought at a trendy gallery for thousands of dollars. He liked the aesthetic of the city, the glossy surface, the illusion of power, but he knew nothing, absolutely nothing, about the steel bones, the deep foundations, the years of precise calculations that held it all up, that kept it from collapsing. I walked down the hall to the double doors of his home office. He called it his command center, a grandiose title for a room where he mostly surfed the web and made bad investments. It was the largest room in the house, with expansive bay windows overlooking the perfectly manicured lawn I mowed every Thursday, a task I undertook not out of obligation, but out of a quiet sense of order and stewardship. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of cedar and the expensive leather polish the cleaning lady used on his ergonomic, imported office chair. It was messy, not the organized chaos of a working engineer, the deliberate clutter of blueprints and calculations, but the careless disarray of a man who fully expects others to pick up after him, to clean up his messes. I walked over to his desk. It was a massive slab of imported glass, resting on gleaming chrome legs, a monument to ostentation. In the center sat his computer, a high-performance machine with 3 monitors curved around the seat like the cockpit of a fighter jet, designed for maximum immersion in his digital world. Chad had always been arrogant about his technology. He mocked my old flip phone, calling it a relic from the Stone Age. He made fun of my old desktop computer in the basement, a sturdy workhorse that still ran perfectly. He told Jessica that I was a digital dinosaur, that I probably didn't even know how to turn on a monitor, let alone navigate the complexities of his financial software. That arrogance, that profound underestimation, was his greatest vulnerability. I tapped the spacebar on his keyboard. The 3 screens flared to life instantly, a sudden burst of digital light in the dim room. He hadn't shut it down. He hadn't even locked it. He simply assumed that even if I wandered in here, a lost old man. I would just see lines and numbers, a confusing jumble of data, and walk away, baffled and harmless. He put the computer to sleep, just like he thought he had put me to sleep, into a quiet, compliant slumber. I sat in his expensive leather chair. It was too soft, too plush, designed for indolence. It swallowed you up, enveloped you in its manufactured comfort. I preferred a hard stool, the kind that kept your spine straight, your mind sharp, your focus unwavering. I looked at the screens. They were filled with rapidly changing stock tickers, flickering colors from red to green, rapid-fire chat windows, and open spreadsheets. A dizzying array of information. To the untrained eye, it looked like complex financial wizardry, the cutting edge of modern finance. To me, it looked like a structure with far too much load on the top floor, a disaster waiting to happen. My eyes scanned the desk, taking in every detail. A yellow sticky note was plastered to the bottom of the center monitor, a small, vibrant square of paper. It had a string of characters written in Chad's jagged, almost impatient handwriting. Tahoe House 7-5. It was the password for his primary banking portal, his digital key to my family's financial future. He was lazy. A good engineer memorizes his safety protocols, embeds them into his very being. A lazy man writes them on a post-it note, leaving a gaping vulnerability. I didn't need to log in yet. I needed to see what he had been doing, what last-minute schemes he had cooked up before he left to assault me in the kitchen. I looked to the left of the desk. A wire mesh trash can sat there, overflowing with crumpled paper, discarded dreams, and hastily scrawled notes. Chad liked to print things out to read them. He said he liked the feel of paper when he was making big moves, a tactile connection to his abstract world of finance. I reached into the bin and pulled out a tightly wadded ball of paper from the very top. I smoothed it out on the glass desk, carefully pressing the wrinkles flat with my palm, treating it like a precious artifact. It was a transaction confirmation from West Coast Investments. I felt a cold, sickening drop in my stomach, a premonition of disaster. That was where my 401k, my life savings, was held. The money I had saved over 45 years of freezing winters and scorching summers on construction sites. Every ache, every strained muscle, every blister, building it up brick by painful brick. The money meant for my final years, so I would never be a burden to anyone, least of all to my daughter. I read the document. Withdrawal amount, $200,000. Distribution method, wire transfer. Destination account, Hayes Ventures LLC. My eyes moved slowly to the bottom of the page. There was a signature, Frank Peterson. It looked like my name. It looked like my handwriting, but the loop on the P was too wide, lacking my characteristic double loop, and the pressure was too light. I signed my name like I etched it in stone, with a deliberate, firm hand, each stroke a commitment. This signature, however, floated on the paper, light and uncertain. He had practiced. He had forged my signature to drain the bulk of my retirement fund just last month. That was why he needed the loan on the Lake Tahoe house today with such frantic urgency. He had already spent my retirement, every last penny, and he was still in a deep, dark hole. I felt a wave of nausea, a bitter bile rising in my throat. He had stolen my safety net. He had reached into my pocket, into the very core of my security, and taken the years of labor I had stored there, the decades of careful planning. But I forced the emotion down. I needed to be cold. I needed to be precise. I turned my attention back to the screens. One of the windows was an email draft. It was addressed to a journalist at the Financial Times, a major publication. The subject line read, Vance Corporation Structural Defect Whistleblower. I leaned closer, adjusting my position in the overly soft chair, my eyes scanning the damning text. The email was drafted but not yet sent, a ticking time bomb. It read, I have obtained internal memos from the original construction phase of the Vance Plaza Tower. These documents confirm that the lead structural engineer, Frank Peterson, knowingly approved substandard concrete density for the main load-bearing pylons in the underground garage. He was paid off by suppliers to look the other way. The building is structurally unsound, and a collapse event is statistically probable within the next 5 years. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt on its axis, the polished glass desk shimmering like water. Vance Plaza, that was my masterpiece. I spent 4 years of my life on that site. Every waking moment, every precise calculation. I checked every truck of concrete myself, personally. I tested every rebar weld personally. That building was safer than the ground it stood on. It was my legacy, the tangible proof that I had existed, that I was good at what I did, that my life had mattered. Chad was not just stealing my money. He was selling my name. He was murdering my reputation, incinerating my legacy with lies. I looked at the other screen. It showed a trading platform. He had a massive short position open on Vance Corporation stock. It all clicked into place. Every piece of the puzzle sliding into alignment like a steel beam locking into a precisely drilled rivet. He was going to send that email. He was going to leak a lie, a venomous falsehood, that I was corrupt, that I was incompetent, that my life's work was a sham. The news would cause a panic. Vance stock would crash, plummeting to the ground, and Chad would make millions, an obscene fortune, betting against the very company I had helped build, the very structure I had helped engineer. He was going to use my destruction, my humiliation, to fund his lavish lifestyle. He was going to burn down my history to warm his soft, greedy hands. I stared at the glowing pixels, at the digital blueprints of his treachery. A cold fury settled over me, replacing the throbbing heat of the slap in the kitchen. This was different. This was the cold, calculating rage of an engineer looking at a building that needed to be condemned, its structural integrity compromised beyond repair. He thought I was a clueless old man. He thought I was just a source of funds, a wellspring of money to be tapped. He did not realize that by attacking my professional integrity, by attempting to dismantle my life's work, he had declared a war he was not equipped to fight, a war he could not possibly win. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone, the cheap, unassuming device. I opened the camera. I took a picture of the forged withdrawal slip, ensuring the lighting was clear. The fake signature, with its single P-loop, starkly visible. I took a picture of the email draft on the screen, the damning words frozen in pixels. I took a picture of his massive short position on the trading platform, showing the millions of dollars he stood to gain from my ruin. I took a picture of the yellow sticky note with his banking password, his casual carelessness captured for posterity. I recorded everything, every pixel of his betrayal, every piece of evidence. Then, carefully, meticulously, I crumpled the paper back into a ball, exactly as I had found it. I placed it back in the trash can, covering it with other discarded papers, erasing my presence. I wiped the glass desk where my hand had rested, removing any heat print of my palm, any trace that I had ever been there. I stood up. My knees did not pop this time. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I looked around the room one last time. This office, with its panoramic view of the city, its expensive leather, and its high-speed connection to the world, was a lie. It was built on a foundation of theft, deceit, and profound disrespect. Chad wanted to talk about structural failure. He wanted to talk about collapse. I walked to the door. "He wants to bring down the foundation of my house," I whispered to the empty room, a vow hanging in the air. "I am going to show him what a real collapse looks like, and I am going to make sure he is standing in the lobby when the roof comes down." I closed the door softly. I had a dinner to prepare, and now I knew exactly what the main course would be. It would be the truth, served cold. The engine of my '95 Chevy Silverado rumbled to life with a cough and a shake that rattled my teeth, a familiar, comforting tremor. It was a sound I loved. It was the sound of honest machinery, of raw, unadulterated power. There were no complex computers in this engine block to hide flaws or cheat emissions tests. It was just iron, oil, and combustion, pure and unadulterated. It was real, authentic, unlike the plastic and fiberglass world Chad Hayes lived in, a world of carefully constructed facades. I backed out of the garage, the tires crunching over the loose gravel that had spilled onto the pristine, swept driveway, a small act of rebellion. I caught a glimpse of the sprawling mansion in the rearview mirror. It looked like a fortress, a monument to new money and questionable taste. I had poured the foundation for it myself. Every concrete slab, every support beam meticulously placed, ensuring it would stand for 100 years, a testament to my skill. I never knew I was building the prison where my beloved Beatrice would die, slowly, painfully, and where my dignity would be stripped away, piece by painful piece. I drove toward the city, bypassing the discount grocery store where I usually shopped with my coupons and calculator, a careful manager of finite resources. Today, I was not hunting for bargains. I was hunting for weapons, for the tools of my vengeance. I pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the Epicurean Market, a bastion of gourmet indulgence. My rusted bumper, bearing the scars of countless job sites, looked hilariously out of place next to the gleaming Teslas and Range Rovers, symbols of the wealth and ostentation I was about to dismantle. I parked crookedly, deliberately taking up 2 spaces, just because I felt like being a nuisance, a small act of defiance. I stepped out, smoothing down my worn flannel shirt, a uniform of honest labor. I still wore my heavy work boots, scuffed and stained. Let them stare. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, releasing a blast of refrigerated air that smelled of organic produce, artisanal cheeses, and outrageously overpriced flowers. I grabbed a cart, one of the few without a wobbling wheel. I needed precision today. I went straight to the butcher counter. The glass case was illuminated like a jewelry store display, each cut of meat presented like a precious gem. Inside, resting on beds of crushed ice, were cuts of meat that cost more than my first car, more than I would have spent on a month's worth of groceries. I pointed a calloused finger, a testament to decades of physical work. At the center display, "That one," I told the butcher, a young man with a meticulously waxed mustache and perfectly manicured hands, who looked like he had never held a hammer in his life. "The Wagyu of 5, I want 4 pounds, thick cut, and trim the fat, but leave enough for the sear." He looked at me, scanning my worn clothes, my work boots, and the bruise blooming, a dark purple blossom, on my cheek. "Sir," he said, his voice dripping with a practiced, polite condescension, "that is $150 a pound. We have some very nice chuck roast on sale if you're looking for a stew. Much more economical." I looked at him, my gaze unwavering. I did not blink. "I did not ask for chuck roast, son," I said, my voice low and steady. "I asked for the Wagyu, 4 pounds, thick cut. Trim the fat, leave enough for the sear." He swallowed hard, a visible gulp in his throat, then nodded, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps just resignation, in his eyes. He reached into the case. As he weighed the meat, my mind drifted back 6 months, to a Tuesday that was etched into my memory with a pain that no amount of time could dull. The day I asked Chad for money to buy Beatrice her pain medication. The insurance had capped out, a cruel limitation, and she was hurting. She was hurting so bad she couldn't sleep, her restless moans a torment to my soul. The good medicine, the brand name that actually worked without making her nauseous, the one that offered true relief, cost $400. Chad had stood in the kitchen, casually checking his reflection in his $20,000 Rolex, a dismissive sneer on his face. $400, Frank, he had scoffed, as if the amount was absurd. "That is ridiculous. Just get the generic stuff. It's the same chemical compound. She won't know the difference. We're tight this month. I have to pay the membership fees at the country club, and that new crypto investment is demanding more capital." He bought a watch that cost as much as a car, more than some people made in a year. But he wouldn't pay for my dying wife to have a painless night. I bought the generic, and I held her hand, my heart breaking, while she vomited from the brutal side effects until dawn. I watched the butcher meticulously wrap the Wagyu, the paper rustling softly. 4 pounds, $600. "I'll take it," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I threw the package into the cart. It landed with a heavy thud, a solid weight. Next was the produce section. I needed mushrooms, but not just any mushrooms. I walked to the specialty case, a temperature-controlled display where they kept the rare, exotic fungi. Black winter truffles, imported from France. They looked like lumps of coal, rough and unassuming, but they smelled like rich earth and pungent musk, an intoxicating aroma. I picked up a small jar, $80 an ounce. Chad loved to talk about refinement. He loved to talk about the finer things, about having a discerning palate. He had once thrown a fit, a childish tantrum, because the cleaning lady had, in her innocent ignorance, used the wrong polish on his Italian leather shoes. "If you want to be treated like a king, Chad," I whispered to the jar in my hand, my voice a low, dangerous murmur, "I am going to feed you like one, right before the guillotine drops." I put 3 jars in the cart. Finally, I headed to the wine cellar at the back of the store. It was temperature-controlled, hushed, and smelled of cork and old oak, a sanctuary for the discerning. I walked past the shelves of $20 bottles that Chad usually drank on weeknights, cheap imitations of true vintage. I went to the locked cabinet, the inner sanctum, where the truly rare vintages were kept. I scanned the labels, my eyes searching, until I found it, Chateau Margaux, 1995. The year Jessica was born. I stared at the bottle through the thick glass, a crystal window to a past that felt both cherished and shattered. I remembered that year. I remembered holding her in the delivery room, her tiny hand, so perfect, gripping my finger, an unbreakable bond. I remembered promising her, with all the fervor of a new father, that I would build her a world where she would never be unsafe, where she would always be secure. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple, for 20 years to keep that promise, building the foundation of her life with my own sweat, my own sacrificing. And this morning, she watched her husband strike me, watched him hit her 72-year-old father, and then told me I was annoying him. I waved down the sommelier, a young man with a slight French accent and an air of quiet authority. He came over with a key ring, his movements precise. "Open it," I said. He unlocked the cabinet and carefully pulled the bottle out. It was covered in a fine, delicate layer of dust, a testament to its age and provenance. "An excellent choice, sir," he said, his voice respectful. "A very complex vintage. Are you celebrating a special occasion?" "You could say that," I replied, taking the bottle, its weight heavy and comforting in my hand. "I am celebrating the end of an era, and the beginning of another." I placed the wine in the child's seat of the cart, careful not to clatter it against the metal, treating it with the reverence it deserved, as if it were a passenger, a silent witness. As I turned to head toward the checkout, a voice, deep and raspy, called out from the cheese counter, "Frank Peterson, is that you?" I stopped. I knew that voice. It was the voice of a man who had smoked too many cigarettes on high-rise scaffolding, who had shouted commands over the roar of heavy machinery, the voice of an honest working man. I turned around. Standing there, holding a wedge of aged cheddar, was Mike Jenkins. We had worked together on the Golden Gate Park expansion project back in the early 2000s. He was a site foreman, a good man who knew how to read a blueprint better than most architects, who understood the ground as well as I did the sky. "Mike," I said, forcing a smile, a mask over my true feelings. "It has been a long time." He walked over, his eyes widening as he saw the bruise on my face, a grim question unspoken. "Jesus, Frank, what happened? You run into a steel beam?" "Something like that," I said, touching my cheek. The pain a familiar throb. "Just a little household accident." Mike looked skeptical, his eyes searching, but he knew the code. You don't push a man about his scars unless he offers the story. He looked into my cart instead. A diversion. Wagyu beef, Chateau Margaux, truffles. Hell, Frank, did you hit the lottery? Or did you finally decide to sell that patent? I stiffened. The patent. Years ago, in my small workshop in the basement, I had developed a specific type of joint coupling for high-stress seismic zones, a revolutionary design. It was a niche invention, something only a structural engineer, truly immersed in the physics of building, would understand, but it was groundbreaking. It allowed skyscrapers to sway 3% more during an earthquake, absorbing the immense energy, without compromising the core integrity, a testament to flexibility over rigidity. I had patented it, protected it, and then sat on it, refining it, perfecting it. I never sold it because I wanted it to be flawless, truly perfect, a gift to the industry. Chad knew I had some old drawings in the basement, but he had no idea what they were worth, dismissed them as another one of my eccentric old man hobbies. He thought intellectual property was something you bought, something you acquired through venture capital, not something you built, painstakingly, in a garage, with your own two hands. Word on the street is that Vance Construction is looking for a new seismic solution for their West Coast expansion, Mike said, leaning in conspiratorially, his voice low. They're saying your coupling is the only thing that passes the new codes, the only design that truly meets the rigorous demands of California. That patent must be worth a fortune now, Frank. Millions. I looked at the wine bottle in my cart, the 1,995 Chateau Margaux. The year I became a father. The year I started building a legacy I thought I would leave to my family. A foundation for their future. I'm not selling it, Mike, I said quietly, my voice firm. Mike looked confused. You're holding on to it? Why? You're retired. Cash out. Go to Hawaii. Live a little. I'm not holding on to it either, I said. A strange calm washed over me, a profound clarity. Then, what are you doing with it? Mike asked, baffled. I'm giving it away, I said. Mike's jaw dropped, a comical expression on his face. Giving it away? To who? I looked him in the eye, my gaze steady. To the only people who still understand the true value of a solid foundation, I said. You'll hear about it on the news tomorrow, Mike. Tonight, I'm having a dinner party, and I'm serving justice. I patted him on the shoulder and pushed my cart toward the registers, leaving him to ponder my cryptic words. I unloaded the groceries onto the belt, item by item, each expensive component a calculated move. The total came to $1,432. I pulled out my old leather wallet, worn soft with age. Inside was a credit card I hadn't used in 5 years. It was not linked to the joint account Chad monitored, the one he treated as his personal slush fund. It was linked to a separate account, one funded by consulting fees I had done quietly over the years, small, discreet projects for trusted colleagues, fees I had hidden in my safe, a secret reserve. The cashier ran the card. It was approved. I walked out into the parking lot, the plastic bags cutting into my fingers. The weight of my purchases, a physical representation of my resolve. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the asphalt, painting the world in shades of orange and purple. I loaded the precious cargo into the passenger seat of the truck, carefully strapping the Chateau Margaux in with the seatbelt, as if it were a passenger, a silent guest of honor. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The truck vibrated alive, ready. I had the meat, I had the wine, I had the evidence in the safe, and I had the guest list. Chad wanted a feast. He wanted a show. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the lot. I was going home to cook, and when I was done, there wouldn't be any leftovers. The kitchen island was no longer merely a place for hurried family breakfasts, or Jessica's latest organic smoothie experiment. It was a workbench, a tactical command center. I laid out the ingredients with the same meticulous precision I used to lay out blueprints for a suspension bridge, each component in its rightful place. The Wagyu beef sat on a wooden board, its rich marbling of white fat, stark against the deep red, brought to perfect room temperature, ready for the transformative heat. The black truffles, dark and earthy, were nestled in a small glass bowl, their musky aroma already filling the air. The bottle of Chateau Margaux stood open, breathing the air around it, its scent a complex bouquet of oak and history. I sharpened my chef's knife, a heavy, well-balanced tool I had owned for decades. The rhythmic sound of steel against the wet stone was hypnotic, a soothing, primal hiss. Shh, shh. It was the same sound as a shovel hitting gravel, the sound of honest, focused work. I tested the edge against a piece of paper. It sliced through without a sound, a clean, effortless cut. Perfect. I started chopping the shallots for the rich red wine reduction. My hands moved automatically, the years of practice ingrained, a seamless dance of skill and precision. I didn't look at the blade. I looked at the clock on the microwave, its digital display a silent countdown. 6:15. They would be here soon. I placed a heavy cast-iron skillet on the burner and cranked the flame to high. You don't cook Wagyu on low heat. You need violence, a sudden, intense burst of energy. You need a thermal shock to sear the outside into a beautiful, crusty mahogany, while keeping the inside meltingly tender, a perfect medium rare. It's like tempering steel. If you are too gentle, too hesitant, it fails. It becomes limp, lifeless. I dropped a knob of butter into the screaming hot pan. It hissed and foamed, turning nut brown in seconds, its rich aroma mingling with the truffles and wine. I laid the thick-cut steaks down. The sound was aggressive, a loud, satisfying sear that filled the kitchen with white smoke and the intoxicating smell of expensive fat rendering, a symphony of culinary power. I was flipping the meat, basting it with the fragrant brown butter and thyme, when I heard the front door open. It was too early. Chad had said 7. The footsteps were light, clicking on the marble floor. High heels. Jessica. She walked into the kitchen, stopping dead in her tracks when the wall of rich, intense aroma hit her. A sensory assault. She waved her hand in front of her face, coughing theatrically. A performative discomfort. "Dad, what on earth are you doing?" she asked, her voice shrill, a thin veneer of annoyance. I did not turn around. I continued basting the steaks, my focus unwavering. "I am cooking dinner, Jessica," I said calmly, as if this were just another mundane task. Like Chad asked. She walked closer, her heels clicking, a staccato rhythm on the polished floor. She peered over my shoulder at the pan, her eyes widening when she saw the thick, marbled cuts of meat. Then she looked at the uncorked bottle of Chateau Margaux on the counter. She looked at the jars of black truffles. This is Wagyu beef," she stammered, her voice laced with disbelief. "And that wine, Dad, that is a $1,000 bottle." "At least." I plated the steaks, arranging them artfully on a warmed platter to rest, allowing the juices to redistribute. "I know what it is, Jessica," I said, wiping my hands on a clean towel. She stepped back, her face twisting into a mask of suspicion, then quickly morphing into something more accusatory. "Where did you get the money for this?" she demanded, her voice rising, losing its composure. "You are on a fixed income. You complain about the price of gas, about Medicare premiums. How did you afford this?" She paused, a dark, unpleasant thought clearly crossing her mind. "Did you take Chad's wallet? Did you go into his office and take his credit card? Dad, if you stole from him after what happened this morning, he is going to call the police. You know he will." I looked at my daughter. She was wearing a designer suit I knew cost more than my first truck. She was carrying a handbag that cost more than the roof repairs I had done myself last year. And she was accusing me of theft, of petty larceny. "I did not steal anything, Jessica," I said quietly, my voice an unsettling calm. "This is my money, my savings." "Savings?" She laughed, a harsh, disbelieving sound that grated on my ears. "What savings? You spent everything on this house." "We know your finances, Dad. I had a little put away," I lied, my voice smooth as concrete, utterly convincing. "For a rainy day, or a special occasion." She looked at the elaborate feast spread out on the counter. The suspicion in her eyes slowly morphed into something else, something pitying, something ultimately triumphant. "Why?" she asked, her voice softening, tinged with a cruel satisfaction. "Why spend it all now? You should have saved it." I poured a small amount of the wine into a glass, raised it, and tasted it. It was perfect, complex, magnificent. "Because this is it, Jessica," I said, looking her directly in the eye, my gaze holding hers. "This is the last of it. It is a farewell dinner." Her face softened further. The tension visibly left her shoulders, replaced by an unmistakable sense of relief. She interpreted my words exactly as I intended. She thought I was giving up. She thought I was spending my last few precious dollars before checking into a state-run nursing home, or moving into a cramped studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, fading into obscurity. She thought I was bowing out, gracefully or otherwise. "Oh, Dad," she said, and her voice took on that sickly, sweet, cloying tone she used when she wanted something, when she was manipulating. "You finally get it. You finally understand that this arrangement, it just wasn't working. It's better this way. For everyone." "For everyone," I repeated, the words hanging heavy in the air. "Yes," she said, reaching out to touch my arm, but pulling back sharply when she saw the grease and char on my sleeve, recoiling from the signs of honest labor. Chad needs his space. We need our privacy. And you need somewhere quieter. Somewhere you don't have to worry about maintenance or bills, or all the stresses of a big house. It's the right decision, Dad. I'm proud of you for being sensible. Proud of me. She was proud that I was making myself homeless, sacrificing my very future, to accommodate her husband's inflated ego, his boundless greed. She looked at the steaks again, licking her lips, her hunger for luxury temporarily eclipsing her self-pity. Well, she said, brightening up, the thought of the meal outweighing any lingering guilt. Since it is a celebration, maybe I'll go change into something nicer. It smells amazing, Dad. Really? You outdid yourself. She turned and trotted out of the kitchen, practically skipping up the stairs, leaving behind a faint trail of expensive perfume. She was happy. She was relieved. Her problem me was solving itself, conveniently removing itself from her life. The old man was leaving, and he was making dinner on his way out, a final act of service. I watched her go. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the feeling of the last tie being irrevocably severed, the final, painful cut. I turned back to the stove. I had a sauce to finish. I deglazed the pan with a generous splash of the Margot, scraping up the rich, brown bits of meat that clung to the bottom, unlocking their deep flavor. I added the chopped truffles and a splash of heavy cream, whisking it all together until it was dark and glossy, a luxurious reduction. It was 6:55. The familiar rumble of the Porsche engine announced their arrival, a predatory growl. It was followed by the abrupt slam of a car door and the boisterous sound of men laughing, their voices already loud with premature triumph. "Something smells expensive," Chad's voice boomed through the hall, echoing through the house. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie, already flushed, excited, brimming with self-satisfaction. Beside him was a man I recognized instantly. Leonard Stone. He was shorter than Chad, rounder, his ill-fitting suit a bit too shiny, his smile an artificial rictus that looked like it was painted on with cheap oil. He carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than he was worth, a prop for his meager dignity. Well, Chad said, walking over to the island, his eyes glinting. "Look at this spread. Wagyu, Margot. Stone, look at this. I told you the old man could cook." Stone sniffed the air, a connoisseur of corruption. "Very impressive, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice oily, slick with feigned admiration. "I didn't know you had it in you." I wiped the knife clean and set it down, the sharp click a punctuation mark. "I have a lot of surprises left in me, Mr. Stone," I said, my voice low and steady, a subtle warning lost on his avarice. Chad laughed, slapping Stone on the back, a rough, comradely gesture. "See, he's docile now. He knows who the alpha is." Chad looked at me, pointing to the bruise on my face. It had darkened to a deep, angry purple, swollen and unmistakable. "That looks nasty, Frank," he said with zero sympathy, a casual cruelty in his tone. "You should put some makeup on it before we eat. Takes away from the appetite, you know." I touched the bruise, feeling its raw heat. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'll wear it. It reminds me of why we are here." Chad shrugged, dismissive. "Suit yourself. Just don't bleed on the tablecloth." He turned to Stone. "Pour yourself a drink, Stone. The old man will serve us in a minute. We'll eat, he'll sign the papers, and then we can get back to business, back to making real money." Stone rubbed his hands together, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, the thought of his fee already animating him. "Excellent. I have the notary seal ready. It will take 2 minutes, tops." They walked past me into the dining room, treating me like part of the furniture, like the hired help. I looked at the clock. 7. Right on cue, the doorbell rang, its chime a clear, resonant signal. Chad stopped mid-stride, his brow furrowed, a flash of annoyance on his face. He turned back to look at me. "Who is that?" he asked sharply. "I didn't order anything." I picked up the heavy platter of meat, the aroma intoxicating, A siren song. I invited a couple of guests, I said calmly, deliberately. Guests? Chad's face reddened, his voice rising in alarm. I told you this was a private meeting, Frank. I don't want your drinking buddies from the Union Hall eating my food. They are not from the Union Hall, I said, walking past him toward the front door, my stride firm, purposeful. And it is not your food, Chad. It is mine. I set the platter down on the elegant dining table, next to the silver candlesticks Jessica had bought for Christmas, each one a memory of a time before. Get rid of them, Chad hissed, his voice low and furious. Now! I ignored him. I walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door wide. Standing on the porch, bathed in the soft yellow light of the entryway, were two people. On the left was a man in a black wool coat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a face carved from granite, a man who exuded an aura of quiet, terrifying authority. David Miller, the U.S. Attorney. On the right was a woman. She was elegant, sharp, wearing a tailored suit that commanded immediate respect. Her eyes were intelligent and piercing, missing nothing. She looked like she could buy and sell Chad 10 times over before breakfast. Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Vance Construction. Chad came up behind me, ready to shout at whoever was disturbing his evening, ready to assert his dominance. What is the meaning of? His voice died in his throat, a sudden, strangled gasp. He recognized Eleanor Vance instantly. He had been obsessing over her company for months, trying to destroy it, poring over its financials, dissecting its every move. Seeing her standing on his porch, in his house, was like seeing a ghost, a specter of his impending doom. But he did not know David Miller. He just saw a big man in a dark suit, an anonymous presence. David, Eleanor, I said, stepping aside, playing the role of the gracious host to perfection. Come in. Dinner is served. The air in the foyer seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment Eleanor Vance stepped across the threshold, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She brought the quiet, steel-edged coldness of the San Francisco evening in with her, clinging to her cashmere coat like a second skin. Chad stood frozen near the dining room archway, his mouth slightly open, looking like a fish pulled suddenly from the water and thrown onto the dock, gasping for air. His eyes darted from Eleanor to me, then back to her, searching frantically for some logical explanation that would make sense of this impossibility, this nightmare made real. In his world, the sterile, abstract world of spreadsheets and stock tickers, Eleanor Vance was just a name, a symbol, a target to be taken down, an abstraction. She was not supposed to be a flesh-and-blood woman, standing in his hallway, in his house. She was certainly not supposed to be calmly wiping her expensive heels on his welcome mat, a casual intrusion into his carefully controlled reality. Eleanor looked at him. Her gaze was not angry. It was surgical, precise. She looked at him the way a seasoned demolition expert looks at a condemned building, searching for the structural weaknesses, the precise points of collapse. Then she smiled. It was a terrifyingly polite smile, a thin, almost imperceptible line that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening," she said, her voice smooth and cultured, carrying an undeniable authority. "You must be Chad. Frank has told me so much about you." Chad made a sound that was half choke, half squeak, a pathetic emission. He tried to compose himself, to regain his shattered dignity. He smoothed his tie with a trembling hand, his instincts as a social climber, honed over years, kicking in even through his rising panic. "Miss Vance," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. I did not know. I mean, it is an honor, a true honor. I follow your work closely, very closely. I watched him struggle, watched him squirm. He was terrified. He was wondering if she knew. He was wondering if she had seen the short positions, the forum posts, the insidious lies he was spreading about her company, about her life's work, about my legacy. But arrogance is a powerful blinder, a self-imposed limitation. I could see the frantic wheels turning in his head. He was already convincing himself that this was a coincidence, a bizarre twist of fate. He was telling himself that the old man just happened to know a rich, powerful woman, that I was too stupid, too senile, to understand the connection, the gravity of the situation. "And who is this?" Chad asked, finally, desperately. turning his attention to the large man looming silently behind Eleanor. He seemed visibly relieved to look away from Eleanor's piercing gaze, from the uncomfortable scrutiny. David Miller stepped fully into the light. He did not smile. He did not offer his hand, a deliberate omission. He just stood there, a monolith in a dark suit, radiating a quiet, unyielding power. "Miller," he said. His voice was a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards, a sound of undeniable authority. "Just a friend of Frank's. I walked past them, playing the role of the gracious host to perfection. My movements deliberate, unhurried. Please, let me take your coats," I said, reaching out a steady hand. Eleanor slipped out of her coat, revealing a charcoal gray power suit that probably cost more than Chad's car, impeccably tailored, radiating competence. David kept his coat on for a moment longer, staring directly at Chad, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable, before finally shrugging it off. Jessica came clicking down the stairs then. She had changed into a silk dress, something elegant and expensive, her hair meticulously styled, ready for her victory dinner, ready to bask in Chad's supposed triumph. She stopped halfway down when she saw the unexpected crowd in the hall, her brow furrowed in confusion, then alarm. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice sharp, tinged with irritation. "Chad, I thought you said it was just Stone." Chad rushed to the bottom of the stairs, grabbing her arm a little too tightly, his grip a testament to his stress. "Jessica, honey, come down," he hissed, his voice pitched high with suppressed panic. "We have guests, important guests. This is Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Vance Construction." Jessica's eyes went wide. She knew the name. Everyone in San Francisco knew the name. Vance Construction was a titan, but she also knew it was the name Chad cursed at his computer screen every night, the company he obsessed over, trying to dismantle. She looked at me, confusion clouding her face, her eyes searching for an explanation. "Dad," she asked, her voice a whisper, "how do you know Eleanor Vance?" I hung the coats neatly in the closet, taking my time to arrange them precisely on the hangers, each small action a deliberate, calming ritual. I turned back to them, clasping my hands behind my back, my posture serene. "Eleanor was one of my best students," I said simply, the truth a quiet bombshell. "Back when I was teaching advanced structural theory at the Institute. She was the only one in her class who could calculate complex wind shear loads in her head without a calculator, with perfect accuracy. A true prodigy." Eleanor nodded at Jessica, a subtle confirmation. "Your father taught me everything I know about keeping a building standing when the world tries to knock it down," she said, her voice resonant with respect. "He is a legend in the industry. Mrs. Hayes." "I assumed you knew." Jessica blinked. She looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking Greek, as if I had transformed into a stranger before her eyes. To her, I was just the guy who fixed the leaky faucets, who paid for the groceries, the quiet old man who faded into the background. She had never asked about my career. She had never asked about the iconic buildings I had helped raise, the structures that defined the city's skyline. "And David?" I continued, gesturing to the large man who was currently inspecting the intricate crown molding in the hallway with a critical, almost forensic eye. "David is my chess partner. We play on Tuesdays. He hates to lose." David turned his gaze to Jessica, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "It's true," he said, his deep voice carrying easily. "Frank is always 3 moves ahead. It's infuriating, but it keeps me sharp for my day job." "And what do you do, Mr. Miller?" Jessica asked, trying desperately to regain her social footing, to categorize him, to place him in her familiar world. "I work for the government," David said vaguely, his tone non-committal. "Legal department." Leonard Stone, who had been hovering nervously by the dining room table, guarding his briefcase like a sentinel, finally stepped forward. He smelled money in the room, the scent of power, and like a moth to a flame, he could not resist. "A pleasure," he said, extending a sweaty, eager hand toward David. "Arthur Stone, attorney at law. I handle all of Chad's business affairs." David looked at Stone's outstretched hand, but did not take it, a deliberate snub. "Stone," he said, tasting the name, a subtle shift in his tone. I believe I have seen your name on some paperwork recently. Interesting filings. Very interesting indeed. Stone paled slightly, a visible blanching of his complexion, but kept his artificial smile plastered on, a desperate attempt at composure. Oh, really? Well, I have a very active practice. Shall we eat? I interrupted before the tension could snap the cable, before Stone could dig himself deeper. The meat is resting, I said, my voice cutting through the strained silence. It is at the perfect temperature. Please, everyone, into the dining room. I ushered them into the dining room. It was a formal room, with high ceilings and a long mahogany table that seated 10, a space designed for grand occasions. I had set 5 places, a carefully calculated number. Chad hung back, pulling Jessica close to him, his grip possessive. I pretended to adjust the elaborate centerpiece, but I was listening. I knew the acoustics of this house perfectly. The archway amplified whispers, carrying them clearly. What is she doing here? Chad hissed, his face inches from Jessica's ear, his voice raw with panic. Did you know about this? No! Jessica whispered back, her voice tight with fear. He never tells me anything. What do we do? She's the one you're betting against, Chad. If she finds out, she won't find out. Chad snapped, though his voice trembled, betraying his bravado. She's just here for dinner. The old man probably doesn't even know what I'm doing. He just invited his old friends to show off. Look at him! He's oblivious! He looked over at me. I was pouring water into crystal goblets, humming a little tune, looking for all the world like a happy, senile grandfather, utterly harmless. We just need to get through dinner, Chad whispered, urgency lacing every word. Let them eat. Keep the conversation light. As soon as the last bite is gone, you claim a headache. We kick them out. Then I make him sign the papers. But what if she stays? Jessica asked, her voice high-pitched with anxiety. She won't, Chad said, a forced confidence. I'll make sure of it. Just smile, pour the wine, and for God's sake, do not mention the stock market. He straightened his jacket, pasted a fake smile on his face, and walked into the dining room, an actor stepping onto a stage. Please, sit anywhere, he said, his voice booming with false conviviality. Miss Vance, please take the seat to my right. I would love to hear your thoughts on the current zoning laws in the Loop, the nuances of urban development in San Francisco. Eleanor looked at the seat offered. Then she looked at me. A silent exchange. I think I will sit next to Frank, she said, walking to the other end of the table, her movements graceful and deliberate. If you don't mind. Chad's fake smile twitched, a momentary break in his composure. Of course, of course. He forced a laugh. Frank, sit down. Stop hovering. I took my seat at the foot of the table. David sat on my left, Eleanor on my right. Chad and Jessica were at the head, with Stone sandwiched awkwardly in the middle. It looked less like a dinner party, and more like a tribunal. Chad poured the wine. The 1,995 Chateau Margaux glugged into the glasses, a deep, rich ruby color, reflecting the chandelier's light. To old friends, Chad said, raising his glass, his hand shaking just enough to make the wine ripple, and new opportunities. David did not raise his glass. Neither did Eleanor. I raised mine. To clarity, I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room, and to the structural integrity of the truth. We drank. The wine was magnificent. It tasted of berries and earth and time. It tasted like the calm before the storm. Chad set his glass down quickly, eager to regain control. So, Frank tells us you are here to witness the signing, he said, trying to seize the narrative, to present a false reality. It is just a formality, really. A little family business restructuring. Nothing fascinating for people of your stature, I am sure. Actually, David said, his voice cutting through the room like a jackhammer, a sudden, jarring sound. I find family business fascinating. You never know what you are going to find when you start peeling back the layers, what secrets are hidden beneath the surface. Chad laughed nervously, a brittle, unconvincing sound. Well, we are a very boring family, I am afraid. Just hard work and investments. Honest, straightforward investments. Investments, Eleanor said, her voice soft, contemplative. She picked up her fork, inspecting the tines, a small, elegant gesture. "I hear you have a very aggressive strategy, Mr. Hayes." "Very aggressive indeed." Chad choked on his wine. He coughed, his face turning a blotchy red. Jessica patted his back, looking alarmed, trying to soothe him. I like to take risks," he wheezed, finally catching his breath. "We noticed," David said, his voice dry, devoid of humor. I stood up. "I will get the meat," I said. I walked back into the kitchen. My heart was beating slow and strong, a steady, rhythmic thrum. The trap was set. The rats were in the cage. I picked up the heavy silver platter. The Wagyu beef sizzled softly, its aroma filling the kitchen. I arranged the silver cloche over it, hiding the meat from view, creating an illusion. But I had another platter prepared, one hidden in the pantry. A second silver platter, identical to the first, a perfect deception. I looked at it. Underneath that silver dome was not meat. It was the stack of papers from the safe, the photos of the computer screen, the forensic accounting, the recordings. I took a deep breath, the scent of cooked meat and expensive wine filling my lungs. I picked up the first platter, the one with the beef. "First, we feed them," I whispered to myself, a grim resolve in my voice. "Then we finish them." I walked back into the dining room, the silver platter held high, a beacon of delicious, impending doom. "Dinner is served," I announced, my voice carrying clearly. Chad looked at me with contempt, his eyes narrowing, impatient. "Just put it down, Frank. Let's get this over with." I placed the platter, heavy and gleaming, in the center of the table. "Enjoy it, Chad," I thought. "It is the last meal you will ever eat as a free man, a final indulgence." I moved around the table with the bottle of Chateau Margaux, wrapped in a pristine white linen napkin. The cork had come out with a soft sigh, the sound of a well-kept secret finally being released into the air. I poured a measure into Eleanor's glass first, an act of deference. The deep ruby liquid swirled against the crystal, catching the light from the chandelier, casting shimmering reflections. She nodded her thanks, her eyes lingering on the label. She knew exactly what this bottle was. Its vintage, its history. She knew that 1995 was a year of struggle and triumph in the vineyards of Bordeaux, just as it had been in my own life, a year of profound change. I poured for David next. He did not look at the wine. He kept his eyes fixed on Chad, studying him with the detached intensity of a predator, watching a wounded animal limp across a clearing, unaware of the trap closing around it. Then I moved to Stone. The lawyer held his glass out eagerly, his greedy fingers leaving smudges on the delicate stem. He was already calculating the price of the wine in his head, wondering how much of my money Chad had spent to buy it, to put on this lavish display. He did not know that this bottle was paid for with sweat equity, saved from a time when I still had hope for the future, when my dreams for my daughter were still pure. Finally, I poured for Chad and Jessica. Chad did not even look at me. He was too busy leaning toward Eleanor, invading her personal space with his overpowering cologne and his palpable desperation, trying to charm her, to disarm her. "You know, Miss Vance," Chad said, his voice loud and booming, trying to fill the room with his self-importance, his manufactured confidence. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you. I have been analyzing your company's market movements for months. I have to say, your conservative approach to the West Coast expansion, it is quaint. Charming, really. But in this market, hesitation is death. You have to be aggressive. You have to move fast." I stepped back into the shadows near the sideboard, the empty bottle, a symbol of a promise fulfilled, in my hand. I watched the scene unfold, a slow-motion car crash. It was like watching a man walk blindfolded onto a construction site where the safety rails had been deliberately removed, unaware of the precipice. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. She savored it, letting the complex tannins settle on her tongue, her expression unreadable. She placed the glass down with a soft click, the sound precise. "Quaint," she repeated, testing the word, rolling it on her tongue. "That is an interesting choice of vocabulary, Mr. Hayes. In my industry, We prefer the word deliberate. When you are pouring millions of tons of concrete, when you are building structures that must withstand the forces of nature, you measure twice, you pour once. Mistakes are not just lines on a spreadsheet, Mr. Hayes. They are lives. They are legacies. They are human consequences. Chad waved his hand dismissively, a grand gesture that encompassed the entire room and everything in it, his contempt for the tangible, for real work, palpable. That is the old way of thinking, he said, chuckling as if she had told a joke, a patronizing sound. That is the brick-and-mortar mindset, a relic of the past. But we live in the digital age now. Value is not about what you build. It is about what you can convince people you have built. It is about the narrative, the vision, the perception. He gestured toward me without looking, pointing a finger over his shoulder, a casual dismissal. Take my father-in-law here. Frank is a good man, salt of the earth, but he spent 40 years of his life mixing concrete and welding steel beams. He thinks hard work is the same thing as smart work. He doesn't understand that the real masters of the universe do not get their hands dirty. We move capital. We create value out of thin air, with a few clicks of a mouse. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw, a sharp, involuntary tremor. Mixing concrete. That is what he thought I did. He thought structural engineering was just manual labor, an unthinking, brute force activity. He did not know about the sleepless nights, calculating wind shear, about the complex differential equations, about the intricate physics of load distribution, about the constant innovation required to push the boundaries of what was possible. He did not know that without men like me, the gleaming glass tower he sat in, the source of his supposed wealth, would be nothing more than a pile of twisted metal and shattered glass, an expensive, uninhabitable ruin. Jessica laughed nervously, taking a large gulp of wine, trying to diffuse the palpable tension. Dad did work very hard, Chad. He provided for us. Chad patted her hand condescendingly, a dismissive gesture. Of course, he did, babe, and that is adorable. But let us be honest. He was a laborer. He does not understand the complexities of the financial markets, the intricate dance of modern capitalism. That is why he is so afraid of this loan, this opportunity. He sees debt as a burden, as a mark of failure. I see it as a tool, a powerful lever to move the world, to unlock untold wealth. Eleanor smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a structural inspector finding a fatal crack in a support column, the cold satisfaction of confirming a grave error. A lever, she said softly, her voice still measured, but now with an undeniable edge. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough, and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." But you are forgetting the second part of the equation, Mr. Hayes. The fulcrum, the base. If your base is weak, the lever does not move the world. It snaps, and it crushes the person holding it, bringing them down into the rubble. Chad frowned, confused by the metaphor, unable to grasp its profound implications. He took another drink of wine, swishing it around his mouth like he had seen people do in movies, having no idea what he was tasting, only performing the ritual. "I have a very solid base," he insisted, his voice regaining some of its bluster, born of self-delusion. "My firm is on the cutting edge. We are seeing returns that would make your board of directors weep with joy, Miss Vance. That is why I wanted to talk to you tonight about Vance Construction. I think your stock is undervalued, vulnerable, ripe for a hostile takeover, perhaps." I tightened my grip on the neck of the empty bottle, my knuckles turning white. He was doing it. He was sitting at my table, eating my food, drinking my wine, and openly threatening the woman whose company he was trying to destroy, whose professional reputation he was trying to ruin. The audacity was breathtaking, a level of hubris I had rarely witnessed. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locked onto his, unblinking, unyielding. "Vulnerable," she said, her voice a low murmur, but cutting through the air like a laser. "That is a dangerous word, Mr. Hayes. You know, Mr. Hayes, I have always believed that the most important person in any building project isn't the architect, with their grand visions. It isn't the financier, with their spreadsheets and projections. It is the structural engineer, the one who ensures that when the wind blows and the earth shakes, When the unforeseen forces of nature and time assail it, the building stands. It is the one who understands the integrity of the hidden bones. She paused, letting the silence stretch, a powerful rhetorical device. Your office is in the Vance Plaza Tower, isn't it? She asked. A sudden shift in topic. Chad nodded, puffing out his chest, proud of his address. 42nd floor. Corner office. Best view in the city. It's a magnificent building. It is a magnificent building, Eleanor agreed, her voice almost gentle. It won 3 international awards for safety and innovation. Do you know why? Chad shrugged, dismissive. Good architects, expensive materials, a prime location, I suppose. No, Eleanor said, a hint of steel entering her voice. Because of the seismic joint coupling system used in the foundation, a truly revolutionary design. It allows the building to absorb energy rather than resist it, a testament to flexibility, not rigidity. It was designed by a genius, a man who understood that true strength comes from adaptability, from giving way slightly when necessary, not from unyielding stubbornness. She looked past Chad, her eyes meeting mine in the shadows, a silent acknowledgement. Do you know who designed that system, Mr. Hayes? She asked, her voice clear, resounding in the room. Do you know the name of the man who keeps your 42nd floor from crashing into the basement every time the wind hits 50 miles an hour? Every time a tremor rattles the city? Chad laughed again, a derisive, dismissive sound. I have no idea. Probably some German guy or a Japanese firm. A faceless corporation. Who cares? It's just plumbing and wires in the walls. Basic infrastructure. Just plumbing and wires. I stepped forward out of the shadows. I placed the empty bottle on the sideboard with a deliberate thud, a sharp, resonant sound that cut through the conversation. It was not a German guy. Chad, I said, my voice low, steady, filled with an authority that brooked no argument, and it was not a Japanese firm. Chad turned to look at me, annoyed at the interruption, his face contorted in a mask of irritation. Frank, we are talking business here. Go get the next course and bring the notary. I want to get this over with. David Miller cleared his throat. The sound was deep, resonant, like a stone dropped into a deep well, a sound that commanded immediate, undivided attention. Everyone at the table turned to look at the man in the black suit, who had not spoken a word since he entered the house, an enigma until now. David placed his large, steady hands on the table, calm and unwavering. He looked at Chad with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were examining a particularly interesting, yet ultimately insignificant, insect. You know, Chad, David Miller said, his voice rumbling through the room, a low, powerful vibration. I find your theories on leverage very interesting, especially the part about creating value out of thin air. Chad looked at him, desperately trying to place him, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place, and dawning horror. He was realizing, too late, that this was not just an old chess partner, an anonymous retiree. And you are a lawyer? Chad asked, his confidence wavering, a noticeable crack in his facade. Something like that, David said, his voice deceptively casual. I work with numbers, too. I look for patterns, anomalies, things that don't quite fit. And recently, a very interesting pattern crossed my desk. Chad's fake smile faltered, replaced by a growing unease. What kind of pattern? Short sales, David said, his voice taking on a sharper, more incisive edge. Massive, leveraged short positions against a single company. Vance Construction, executed through a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, deliberately designed to obscure ownership. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the almost imperceptible hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the shallow, frantic breathing of my daughter. Chad froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his wine glass, stopped in midair, suspended, a grotesque tableau. I do not know what you are talking about, he stammered, his voice thin, reedy. I am a venture capitalist. I have a diverse portfolio. These are standard market practices. David leaned in closer, his eyes fixed on Chad. I am sure you do, David said, his voice laced with menace. But the Securities and Exchange Commission has a different name for it. They call it market manipulation and insider trading. especially when it's based on fabricated information, on malicious lies. Chad turned pale, a ghastly white. His eyes darted to Stone, seeking help, an escape hatch. Stone was staring at his plate, sweating profusely, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floorboards, to become invisible. "I heard you have been having some trouble with the SEC lately, Stone," David continued relentlessly, his gaze now shifting to the trembling lawyer. "I heard they are preparing a subpoena. In fact, I heard the warrant was signed this morning, specifically naming you as an accessory." Chad's hand shook violently, his fingers spasmed. The heavy crystal fork he was holding slipped from his grip. It hit the fine china plate with a loud, sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. It bounced off the rim and fell onto the table, spinning noisily before coming to a rest, pointing straight at his heart. A silent, symbolic accusation. Chad stared at the fork, mesmerized by its cold, metallic gleam. He could not seem to make his hand work to pick it up. He looked up at David, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes, a primal terror that stripped away all his bravado. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked to the table. I picked up the silver cloche that was covering the center platter. The metal was cool in my hands, heavy and deliberate. "He is the man who is going to introduce you to your new reality, Chad," I said, my voice low, steady, utterly calm. I lifted the silver dome. Underneath, sitting on the velvet-lined tray, was not the Wagyu beef. It was a stack of papers, a thick, stapled report with the Department of Justice seal emblazoned on the cover page. And resting on top of it, stark and unassuming, was a small black USB drive. "Enjoy your meal," I said. "It is going to be a long night." The silver dome sat on the table like a tombstone, but Chad refused to read the inscription. He stared at the Department of Justice seal for a fraction of a second, his eyes bulging, then he squeezed them shut, willing it all away. Denial is a powerful drug. It can make a man ignore the fire burning his own shoes just because he doesn't want to buy a new pair, just because acknowledging the truth is too painful. He swept his arm across the table in a violent, jerky motion, knocking the crystal wine glass over. The dark red liquid bled across the pristine white tablecloth, staining the fine linen like an expanding wound, a spreading pool of guilt. He did not apologize. He did not reach for a napkin. Instead, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick blue folder, his trump card, or so he thought. "Enough," Chad roared, slamming the folder down onto the wet tablecloth, the sound making Jessica jump, a small shriek escaping her lips. She looked at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. She had never seen him unravel like this in public. In private, yes. She had witnessed the temper tantrums when the market closed down or when the Wi-Fi lagged, but never in front of strangers, never in front of Eleanor Vance, never in front of this imposing man in the black suit. "Stop the theatrics, Frank," Chad shouted, spitting a little as he spoke, his voice hoarse with rage. "I do not care about your little props. I do not care about your fake friends. I have a liquidity deadline at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and you are going to fix it." He ripped the folder open and shoved a document toward me. It was the mortgage agreement. The paper was already damp from the spilled wine, but the signature line was dry and waiting, an expectant blank space. "Sign it," he commanded, his fingers stabbing the paper, leaving an indentation. "Sign the damn house over, so I can get Stone to wire the funds. Do it now, and maybe I will let you keep living in the basement. Don't make me call the orderlies to drag you to a home tonight, you old fool." I looked at the paper. It was a standard lien agreement. It would strip every last bit of equity out of the property, leaving nothing but a mountain of debt. If he defaulted, and I knew with the certainty of an engineer that he would, the bank would take the house within 6 months. He was asking me to sign my own eviction notice, to voluntarily condemn myself to homelessness. I did not move. I did not reach for the pen he threw at me, which clattered uselessly on the table. I just looked at him with the calm detachment of a man watching a building collapse from a safe distance, an architect of his own destruction. Eleanor reached out. Her hand was steady, manicured, and draped in elegant gold bracelets. She picked up the soggy document with 2 fingers as if it were a soiled rag, something unclean. May I? She asked, not waiting for an answer. She brought the paper closer to the candlelight, adjusting her reading glasses. She scanned the terms, her eyes moving quickly, efficiently. She looked at the predatory interest rate. She looked at the property description. Then she laughed. It was not a polite laugh, not a nervous titter. It was a genuine, amused chuckle. The sound of a seasoned professional seeing an amateur make a fatal error in calculation. A rookie mistake. Chad glared at her, his face purple with fury. "What is so funny?" "Oh, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said, placing the paper back down, a dismissive gesture. "It is just that this document is worthless. It is a fairy tale, a child's fantasy." Chad turned a deeper shade of purple, almost black. "It is a standard lien, drafted by my attorney. It is perfectly legal. It might be drafted correctly," Eleanor said, wiping her fingers fastidiously on a napkin. "But the premise is flawed. You cannot mortgage this house, Chad. You cannot leverage it. You cannot sell it. It is not yours to do so. And why is that?" Chad sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, convinced I was behind this, that I was playing some trick, because the old man is stubborn? Because he hid it from me? "No," Eleanor said, her eyes dancing with a subtle mirth, a flicker of triumph. "Because you do not own it." The room went silent again, a profound, heavy quiet. Jessica set her glass down hard, the crystal clinking sharply. "Excuse me?" Jessica said, her voice trembling with indignation, with disbelief. "Of course, we own it. We have lived here for 5 years. We picked out the curtains. We renovated the master bath. My name is on the mailbox, for goodness sake." Eleanor looked at Jessica with a touch of pity, a gentle condescension. "Putting your name on a mailbox does not convey title, dear," she said softly, but with an undeniable edge of authority. "I had my team run a title search on this property this morning, when Frank invited me. I like to know where I am eating, and according to the San Mateo County Recorder of Deeds, neither Chad Hayes nor Jessica Hayes appears anywhere on the title history. This property belongs solely to the Blackwood Trust." Chad stood up, his chair scraping loudly, violently against the floor, a jarring sound. "That is a lie! Frank bought this house for us. It was a wedding gift. He put it in our names. He told us." He turned to me, his eyes wild, frantic, searching for affirmation, for a lifeline. "Tell her, Frank, tell her it is my house." I took a slow sip of my water. It was cool and clean, a refreshing contrast to the toxic atmosphere in the room. "I never said it was your house, Chad," I said quietly, my voice utterly calm. "I said it was your home. There is a difference." "What are you talking about?" Jessica cried, standing up to join her husband, her face a mixture of fear and confusion. "You signed the papers at the closing, Dad. You gave us the keys." "I signed the papers as the trustee," I corrected her, my voice clear and precise. "Trustee?" Chad repeated the word, confusion clouding his features, the term hanging in the air like smoke. "Yes," I said. 10 years ago, when I started seeing how you spent money, Chad, when I saw how you leased cars you could not afford, how you bought expensive suits on credit, how you gambled recklessly with every penny you had, I made a decision. I knew that if I gave this house directly to Jessica, you would leverage it within a year. You would gamble it away, sell it off for parts, just like everything else you touched. I looked at Stone. The lawyer was trying desperately to make himself invisible, sinking lower in his chair, his face slick with sweat. "So," I continued, my voice measured, building my case brick by brick, I created the Peterson Trust, a revocable living trust. I am the sole grantor and the sole trustee. The house belongs to the trust, not to me, not to you. It is held in perpetuity, for as long as I decide. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my gaze sweeping over them. "You have been living here as guests," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Guests who do not pay rent. Guests who treat the landlord like a servant. Guests who believe they own everything simply because they occupy the space. But you own nothing. The equity you are trying to sell to save your skin, to cover your debts, does not exist for you. It is a ghost, an illusion." Chad looked at Stone, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Is this true? Stone loosened his collar, struggling for breath. He looked like he was having a heart attack. I did not check the title deed recently, Chad. Stone stammered, his voice weak, pathetic. I assumed since you lived here. You assumed? Chad screamed, his voice cracking, truly losing control now. I pay you $500 an hour to assume. Stone, you incompetent fool. He turned back to me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, venom dripping from his every pore. He looked like a cornered rat, realizing the trap had no exit, no escape. You old bastard, he hissed, his voice low and guttural. You tricked us. You let us put money into this place. We paid for the pool. We paid for the landscaping. You paid for nothing. I reminded him. I said, my voice calm, factual. I paid for the pool maintenance. I paid the gardeners. I paid for the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, every single recurring cost. You just threw parties here and pretended you were rich, living off my generosity, off my assets. Chad slammed his fists onto the table, making the plates jump, the silverware clatter violently. I do not care about your trust, he shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. You can revoke it. You can sign it over. Do it now, Frank. I need that money. I am short on Van's stock, and the margin call is coming at opening bell. If I do not post collateral, they will liquidate me. I will lose everything. My firm, my reputation, my entire future. He pointed a shaking finger at my face, an accusation. You owe me this, he screamed, for taking care of you, for letting you live here after Mom died, for being such a burden. Sign the paper. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slapped me in the kitchen. I looked at the man who had forged my signature, who had stolen my retirement. I looked at the man who wanted to destroy my reputation, my legacy, the very foundation of my life. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to pull him out of the rubble of the disaster he had so meticulously created, to be his personal rescuer. I stood up slowly. I picked up the wine-stained mortgage paper, its edges soggy and dark. I looked Chad directly in the eye, my gaze unwavering. You want to mortgage my house to pay for your gambling debts? I asked, my voice steady as a steel beam, holding firm against his onslaught. You want me to destroy my security, my last vestiges of independence, to save your vanity, your inflated ego, your pathetic house of cards? Yes, Chad breathed, thinking he had won, thinking I was about to cave, to finally submit. Just sign it! I ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room, a sharp, decisive tearing. Then I ripped it again, and again, and again, until it was just a pile of wet confetti on the table, utterly worthless, utterly destroyed. Never, I said, my voice low and final. Chad stared at the torn paper, his face slack, devoid of all color, of all hope. What did you say? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I said never, I repeated, my voice rising, gaining strength, filling the room with my resolve. Not 1 cent, not 1 brick. You dug this hole, Chad. You can climb out of it, or you can let the dirt bury you. But you are not pulling me down with you. Not anymore. Jessica let out a sob, a heartbroken wail. Dad, please! He will go to jail. I looked at my daughter. She was crying now, but they were tears of fear for herself, for her shattered lifestyle, not for me. He should have thought of that before he forged my signature. Jessica, I said, my voice devoid of pity. He should have thought of that before he raised his hand to me in my own kitchen, in my own house, the house I bought for you. Chad lunged. He came across the table, knocking over chairs, reaching for my throat, his eyes blind with panic and pure, unadulterated rage. You ruined me, he screamed, his voice raw. I will kill you. He never made it. David Miller moved with a speed that belied his size, his years. He was out of his chair and blocking Chad's path before Chad could even clear the centerpiece. A powerful, unyielding barrier. Sit down, son, David rumbled, his hand clamping onto Chad's shoulder like a vice, an inescapable grip. Unless you want to add assault on a federal officer to your list of problems tonight. Chad froze. He looked at David's hand, then at his face. then at the gold Department of Justice pin subtly glinting on his lapel. The reality of who was in the room, the true gravity of his situation, finally crashed down on him, a crushing weight. "Federal officer?" Chad whispered, the words barely escaping his lips, his voice hollow. David smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile, utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh, we haven't even gotten to the dessert yet, Chad," he said, his voice a low growl. "Sit down. Frank has one more course to serve." Chad sat heavily in his chair, pushed down by the immense weight of David's hand and the sudden, overwhelming gravity of his situation. He looked like a man who had just survived a horrific car crash, only to realize he was still trapped inside the burning wreckage, with no escape. He rubbed his shoulder where David had grabbed him, his eyes darting around the room, searching frantically for an exit that did not exist. I walked to the sideboard. My movements were slow and deliberate. I was not in a hurry anymore. The structural integrity of the evening had held. The load-bearing walls were coming down exactly as I had calculated, precise and inevitable. I picked up the second silver platter. It was identical to the first one, the one that had hidden the Department of Justice report. This one was lighter, but the contents were far more volatile, far more explosive. I carried it to the table. The silver cloche gleamed under the crystal chandelier, reflecting the distorted, terrified faces of the people sitting around the mahogany surface. Jessica was weeping softly now, her face buried in her hands, her carefully applied makeup streaking. Stone was wiping sweat from his forehead with a napkin that was already soaked, his eyes wide with fear. Eleanor was watching me, her eyes sharp and expectant, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. I placed the platter directly in front of Chad. It sat on the white tablecloth like a final offering, a grim last supper. "I have one last course for you, Chad," I said, my voice quiet, almost gentle. Chad stared at the silver dome. He did not want to touch it. He looked at it as if it were a bomb, a device of destruction. In a way, it was. "What is this?" he rasped, his voice dry and brittle, barely a whisper. "It is dessert," I said. "A special delicacy. I prepared it myself, just for you." "Open it," David commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried the unyielding weight of a gavel striking a bench, an inescapable command. Chad reached out. His hand trembled so violently that his fingernails clicked against the silver handle. He gripped it. He took a breath that sounded like a rattle in his chest. A death rattle. He lifted the lid. There was no food underneath. There was no chocolate soufflé or fruit tart. Resting on the velvet lining was a neat stack of color-printed documents and a small black USB drive. Chad stared at them, his eyes wide, unblinking. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, his mind struggling to process the impossible. He picked up the top sheet of paper. It was a screen capture, high resolution, crystal clear. It showed a chat log from an encrypted messaging app. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. The participants were clearly marked as C, Hayes, and A. Stone. I watched his eyes scan the text, reading the damning words. I knew exactly what it said. I had memorized it, every insidious detail. Subject: the old man. C. Hayes. He is asking questions again. He is becoming a liability. A. Stone. We can file for a conservatorship. Claim dementia. If you get 2 doctors to sign off, we can take control of his assets within 48 hours. It's perfectly legal. C. Hayes. Do it. I am tired of asking for permission. Let us put him in that state facility off the highway, the cheap one. He won't know the difference once they medicate him. He will just be a drooling vegetable. Chad dropped the paper. It fluttered to the table, landing face up, the words glaring in the candlelight. Jessica looked at it. She read the words. Her sobbing stopped abruptly, a sudden, chilling silence. She looked at her husband, her face a mask of horror. "You were going to put him in a home?" she whispered, her voice raw with disbelief. "A state facility? You told me you were looking at luxury assisted living communities. You told me he would have a garden view." Chad did not answer her. He was frantically shuffling through the other papers, his hands a blur of motion, a desperate search for an explanation, an escape. The next document was a transaction history from his trading account. It showed the massive naked short positions he had taken against Vance Construction. It showed the staggering leverage ratios. It showed that he had bet every single dollar he had, and millions he did not have, on the destruction of Eleanor's company, on the collapse of my legacy. Eleanor reached over and, with an elegant, deliberate motion, plucked the paper from his hands. She read it quickly, her eyes narrowing, her face hardening into a grim mask. "You leveraged yourself 20-1, she said, her voice icy, razor-sharp. "You were not just betting against my company, Mr. Hayes. You were trying to induce a panic. You were leaking false safety reports to analysts, fabricating data, actively sabotaging us. That is not investing. That is a criminal act of sabotage." Chad ignored her. He was staring at the last document in the stack. It was the forensic analysis of my 401k withdrawal, the one with the forged signature, the one that proved, irrevocably, that he had stolen my life savings to fund his margin calls, to prop up his crumbling empire. He looked at the USB drive, his eyes wide with a new, dawning terror. "What is on this?" he asked, his voice barely audible, a pathetic whisper. I leaned in close. "That is the audio," I said. Chad looked up at me, his eyes searching, desperate. "Audio? Yes," I said. "From your office. And from the kitchen. From the night you told Stone to draft the competency papers. I have recordings, Chad. Hours of them. I have you laughing about how easy it was to steal from the clueless old man. I have you planning to sell my patent, the seismic coupling, to a Chinese firm for pennies on the dollar, just to get quick cash to cover your debts, selling off my life's work for scraps." I pointed to the USB drive, a silent, damning indictment. "I heard you, Chad. Every word. I heard you call me a fossil. I heard you say I was useless. I heard you say that the only value I had left was the equity in this house, the very foundation I built for you." Chad's face turned a deep, blotchy red, a mottled mask of fury. The veins in his neck bulged, throbbing visibly. The fear was rapidly evaporating, replaced by a cornered, vicious anger, the rage of a desperate animal. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the floor, the sound echoing loudly in the silent room. "You tapped my office," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me, his hand trembling uncontrollably. "You recorded me in my own home." "My home?" I corrected him, my voice calm, unwavering. "This is illegal," Chad shouted, saliva flying from his lips, his voice rising to a frantic shriek. "This is entrapment. You cannot use this. This is a violation of my privacy rights." "Stone!" He turned to the lawyer, grabbing him by the lapels of his cheap suit, shaking him violently. "Stone, do something. This is inadmissible. He cannot record me without my consent. This is a felony. Sue him." "Sue this old bastard for everything he has left." Stone did not move. He sat there frozen, his eyes fixed on David Miller, whose expression remained impassive, unyielding. Stone knew who David was now. He knew that arguing privacy laws in front of a federal prosecutor, while sitting at a table covered in irrefutable evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted elder abuse, was a suicide mission. Chad shook him again, harder. "Did you hear me, Stone? He violated my rights. He invaded my privacy." I looked at Chad. He was manic. He was hysterical. He truly believed that he was the victim here, that his right to plot my destruction in private superseded my right to survive, to exist with dignity. "You gave up your right to privacy when you decided to commit crimes in my house, Chad," I said, my voice steady, unyielding. "You gave up your rights when you forged my name. You surrendered them when you planned to put me in a state facility." "I did not forge anything," Chad lied, desperate and wild, flailing for a defense. "You signed those papers. You are senile. You forgot. That is what we will tell the judge. You are confused, Frank. You need help." He looked around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. "Jessica, tell them. Tell them your father gets confused. Tell them he signed the withdrawal." Jessica shrank away from him, recoiling from his touch, from his desperation. She looked at the chat log on the table. The words "drooling vegetable" seemed to be burned into her retinas, a searing image. "You were going to have him medicated," she whispered, her voice a horrified gasp. "You were going to lock him away? It was for his own good," Chad screamed, his voice reaching a fever pitch. "He is incompetent. Look at him. He is paranoid. He thinks he is a spy." David Miller stood up. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, inevitable weight of a glacier, an unstoppable force. "That is enough, Mr. Hayes," David said, his voice quiet, yet carrying an immense authority that filled the room. Chad spun around to face him, his eyes wild. "You stay out of this. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a civil matter. It is a family dispute." David reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold badge of the Department of Justice glinted in the candlelight, a stark, irrefutable symbol of federal power. "It ceased to be a civil matter when you wired stolen funds across state lines," David said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It ceased to be a family dispute when you engaged in securities fraud involving a publicly traded company. And it certainly ceased to be private when you conspired to defraud a senior citizen of his pension and to commit elder abuse." David pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The cold metal clicked ominously, the sound of finality. "Chad Hayes, you are under arrest," David said, his voice filling the room, absolute and unyielding. Chad stared at the handcuffs, mesmerized by their cold, metallic glint. He looked at Stone, his eyes pleading. "Do something!" he begged. Stone slowly raised his hands in the air, surrendering before the fight even began, before a single word of defense was uttered. I cannot help you, Chad," Stone stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "If the feds are here, if they have this kind of evidence, I need to think about my own license, my own career." "You coward!" Chad spat, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He looked at the window. For a second, I thought he might run. I thought he might try to dive through the glass and sprint across the perfectly manicured lawn I had mowed just yesterday. But he didn't. He looked at me. His eyes were filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and disbelief, a searing accusation. "You did this!" he hissed. "You ruined me. You ruined everything. We had a good life. We were happy." "You were happy, Chad?" I said, my voice soft, but cutting like glass. "I was just the fuel you were burning to keep yourself warm, to power your illusions." David stepped forward and spun Chad around. He slammed him face down onto the table, right next to the plate of cold Wagyu beef, his face hitting the wood with a sickening thud. Chad grunted as the air left his lungs. "You have the right to remain silent," David recited, tightening the cuffs behind Chad's back, the metallic click a stark, undeniable punctuation. I watched the man who had slapped me get chained like an animal. I watched the man who had called me clueless get outsmarted by the very person he had so profoundly underestimated. I picked up the USB drive from the silver platter. "You should have tried the beef, Chad," I said quietly, a whisper of finality. It really was quite tender. The room was vibrating with the energy of a collapsing star, the aftermath of a controlled explosion. Stone was the first to truly break. He was a survivor of the legal sewers, a man who understood the precise implications of a paper trail, that it was a death sentence for his career, perhaps even his freedom. He lunged across the table, his expensive tie dipping into the pool of spilled wine, a final indignity. His hands clawed at the stack of papers, trying to snatch the forensic accounting report and the chat logs, trying to make the evidence disappear. He looked like a desperate man trying to put a raging fire out with his bare hands. "Put it down, Stone!" David Miller's voice was like a thunderclap, sharp and sudden, echoing through the room. Stone froze, his hand hovering over the documents, his face pale with terror. He looked up at David, defiance flickering in his eyes. "You have no authority here, Miller," Stone hissed. Saliva sprang from his lips. "This is a private residence. These documents are privileged." David reached into his jacket pocket again. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open and set it on the table next to the silver platter. A quiet, powerful statement. The gold badge of the United States Department of Justice gleamed under the crystal chandelier, a stark, undeniable symbol of federal power. "Sit down, Stone," David said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a low, dangerous growl. "I am the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California, And right now, you are about 5 seconds away from adding obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence to your indictment. You do not want to go down that road, Leonard. Stone collapsed back into his chair, all the color draining from his face, leaving him looking like wet dough, utterly defeated. He looked at the badge, then at Chad, then at the front door. He realized there was no way out. Gavin was staring at the badge, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land, gasping for air. You are the prosecutor?" he whispered, his voice thin, reedy. David nodded, a grim confirmation. "And the FBI team stationed in the van outside has been recording every word spoken at this table for the last hour," David said, his voice clear and resonant. "We have the warrant, Chad. We have the wiretap authorization. And thanks to your little performance tonight, we have a confession." Chad turned to me, his eyes wide with betrayal, his face a mask of disbelief. "You set me up!" he screamed. "You wore a wire!" "I did not need to wear a wire, Chad," I said calmly, my voice unwavering. "The house is wired. I designed it that way. A subtle security measure that proved far more useful than I ever imagined." David looked at Chad with a mixture of pity and disgust, a profound disappointment. "You thought Frank was just a senile old man?" David said, his voice incredulous. "You thought he was sitting in the basement, staring at the wall, lost in his memories? You did not know he called me 3 months ago." 3 months? Chad repeated the timeline, the full scope of my deception finally making sense to him, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "Yes," David continued. "Frank noticed the irregularities in the Vance stock patterns back in January. He saw the withdrawal attempts on his accounts. Most men, Chad, would have confronted you immediately. Most men would have shouted, made a scene. But Frank is an engineer. He knows you do not start demolition until the perimeter is secure, until every detail is calculated, until every contingency is planned for. He built this case, brick by brick." David walked around the table. He moved with the heavy inevitability of a bulldozer, an unstoppable force of justice. "He brought us the initial evidence," David said. "He worked tirelessly with our forensic accountants. He let you continue your little game, Chad. He let you dig the hole deeper and deeper, just so we could get the full scope of your operation. We needed to know who else was involved. We needed Stone. And tonight, you handed him to us on a silver platter. Literally, I thought, looking at the tray, a grim satisfaction." Chad looked like he was going to be sick. He realized that for 3 months, while he was mocking me, while he was treating me like a burden, like a clueless old man, I had been the one holding the leash. I had been the one meeting with federal agents, systematically building the case that would end his life as he knew it. "This is entrapment!" Chad shouted, his voice cracking, frantic, desperate. "You cannot do this! I have rights!" "You have the right to remain silent," David said, reaching for his radio, his voice cutting through Chad's protests. "And I strongly suggest you use it." David spoke into the radio, clipped to his shoulder. "Miller to Unit 2. Move in. Secure the premises." The front door burst open. The sound was deafening, splinter undefined.